The sound of splintering wood echoed across the lumber camp as Willa Zimmerman drove her axe into another pine log, her calloused hands gripping the worn handle with practiced ease, despite the burning in her shoulders that never seemed to fade anymore. She had been working at the Copper Creek Lumber Company in Deeming, New Mexico Territory, for 6 months now, and every single day Foreman Marcus Hale found a new reason to make her life difficult. But she needed this job more than she needed pride or comfort. The August heat of 1883 beat down mercilessly on the workers scattered throughout the clearing, but Willa kept her rhythm steady, splitting logs with the same efficiency as any man on the crew. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical braid, dust coating her work dress and boots. At 22 years old, she had learned that life rarely offered kindness to women alone in the world, especially after her father had died in a mining accident 2 years prior, leaving her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. Zimmerman. The harsh voice cut through the sound of axes and saws. Foreman Hale strode toward her, his face red from more than just the sun. He was a thick-bodied man with mean eyes and a perpetual sneer that seemed carved into his features. "You are coming up short on your count again." Willa straightened, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. "That cannot be right, sir. I have split more logs today than yesterday, and my count was good then." "Are you calling me a liar?" Hale stepped closer, his breath reeking of tobacco and whiskey. "Maybe you are spending too much time gossiping with the other workers instead of doing your job." "I do not gossip, I work." Willa kept her voice level despite the anger rising in her chest. This was not the first time Hale had tried to shortchange her, but it was getting worse. Last week, he had claimed she took an extended lunch break when she had eaten her bread and cheese in 15 minutes flat before returning to work. "Well, your work is not good enough. I am docking you 2 days' wages for poor performance." Hale crossed his arms over his chest, clearly expecting her to back down as she usually did. 2 days. The protest escaped before she could stop it. "That is not fair, and you know it. I need that money for my boarding house rent. Should have thought about that before slacking off." Hale turned away dismissively. "Now get back to work, or I will dock you for the whole week." Willa's hands tightened on her axe handle, but she forced herself to take a breath. She could not afford to lose this job, no matter how unfairly Hale treated her. The other lumber companies in the area would not hire women at all, and the few positions available for women in town paid even less than what she was earning here, when Hale actually paid her properly. The rest of the day passed in a blur of physical labor and simmering resentment. By the time the sun began its descent toward the Cook's Range Mountains in the distance, Willa's muscles screamed with exhaustion. She collected her small lunch pail and started the walk back toward town, her boots kicking up dust on the dirt road. She was halfway to Deeming when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw 3 riders approaching at a leisurely pace. Her stomach sank when she recognized Hale and 2 of his friends from the saloon, all of them clearly drunk. "Well, if it is not our complaining Miss Zimmerman," Hale called out, pulling his horse to a stop beside her. "Still upset about your wages?" "I just want what I earned, nothing more." Willa kept walking, refusing to show fear despite her racing heart. "Maybe you should find work more suited to a woman. I hear the saloon is looking for girls." One of Hale's companions laughed at his own crude joke. "Or maybe you could be friendlier to your foreman," Hale added with a leer that made Willa's skin crawl. "I might be inclined to pay you better if you were nicer to me. I would rather starve." The words came out sharper than she intended, and she immediately regretted them when she saw Hale's face darken. He dismounted with surprising speed for a drunk man, grabbing her arm roughly. "You have a smart mouth for someone who needs this job. Let go of me." Willa tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. "Maybe I should teach you some respect," Hale growled, pulling her closer. "The lady asked you to let go." The new voice was deep and calm, but it carried an edge that made everyone freeze. Willa looked up to see a man standing in the road about 20 feet away. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and thick arms that strained against his worn flannel shirt. His dark hair fell past his collar in waves, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and utterly fearless as they assessed the situation. "This is none of your concern, stranger," Hale said, though he loosened his grip slightly. "This is between me and my employee. She does not look like she wants to be talking to you." The stranger took a step closer, and Willa noticed the hunting knife on his belt and the rifle slung across his back. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years in wild country, his boots making almost no sound despite his size. "Who the hell are you?" one of Hale's friends demanded, his hand moving toward his pistol. "Name is Bennett Frost. I trap and hunt in the mountains mostly, but I come down to Deeming for supplies now and then." His gaze never left Hale. "Now, are you going to let the lady go, or do we have a problem?" Hale's face flushed darker with anger and humiliation. "You are making a big mistake, mountain man." "I have made bigger ones and survived." Bennett's voice remained steady, but Willa saw his hand rest casually near his knife. "Let her go. Last time I am asking nicely." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring until finally Hale released Willa's arm with a shove that nearly sent her stumbling. "This is not over, Zimmerman. And you," he pointed at Bennett, "better watch yourself around here." Hale and his companions mounted their horses and rode off toward town, leaving dust and muttered threats in their wake. Willa rubbed her arm where Hale had grabbed her, already feeling the bruises forming. "Are you hurt badly?" Bennett approached slowly, as if worried about startling her. "I will be fine. Thank you for intervening." Now that the immediate danger had passed, Willa felt her legs begin to shake with delayed fear. "He is my foreman at the lumber company. He has been trying to cheat me out of my wages, and when I protested today, he docked me 2 days' pay." Bennett's jaw tightened beneath his beard. "That is not right." "No, but there is not much I can do about it. I need this job." Willa started walking again, and Bennett fell into step beside her, leading his horse by the reins. She noticed it was a sturdy buckskin gelding with full saddlebags. "How long has he been stealing from you?" Bennett asked. "It started small a few months back. A few hours here and there, claiming I was late when I was not, or that my work was not up to standard. But it has gotten worse lately. At this rate, I will not be able to pay my rent." The admission felt strange coming from her lips. She had not told anyone else about her problems, too proud to admit she could not handle things on her own. "Who owns the lumber company?" "Thomas Brennan. He is mostly hands-off, lets Hale run things day to day. I doubt he even knows my name." Willa glanced at Bennett, taking in his weathered appearance and the self-assured way he carried himself. "Why do you ask?" "Because men like your foreman only get away with things when nobody stands up to them. If the owner knew what was happening, he might feel differently about who runs his operation." Bennett's voice carried conviction, as if justice was a simple matter of speaking truth to power. "Mr. Brennan is not going to take the word of a woman worker over his foreman," Willa said wearily. "That is just how things are. Maybe, but it is worth trying." Bennett stopped as they reached the edge of town. The sun was nearly set now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Where are you staying?" "Mrs. Cooper's boarding house on Silver Avenue." Willa hesitated, then added, "Thank you again for your help, Mr. Frost. You did not have to get involved. Call me Bennett." "And yes, I did." His blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. No man should put his hands on a woman like that, and no worker should be cheated out of honest wages. Something in his tone suggested he had strong feelings about fairness and justice, the kind of convictions that came from personal experience rather than abstract ideals. Willa found herself wanting to know more about this mountain man who had appeared out of nowhere to help her, but the church bell was ringing the hour, and she was already late getting back. I should go. Mrs. Cooper charges extra if I miss supper. Willa started to turn away, then looked back. Will you be in town long? A few days, probably. I need to stock up on supplies and sell some furs. Bennett's expression softened slightly, the hard edge leaving his features. I am staying at the hotel on Gold Avenue if you need anything. Willa nodded and hurried toward the boarding house, very aware of his gaze following her until she turned the corner. Her mind whirled with questions about the mysterious stranger, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking curiosity. She had been up since before dawn and would need to be again tomorrow. Mrs. Cooper's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days, but it was clean and relatively affordable. Willa slipped in through the front door and made it to the dining room just as the other boarders were sitting down for supper. She took her usual seat at the end of the long table and accepted a bowl of stew and a piece of bread from Mrs. Cooper, a stern widow in her 50s who ran the house with strict efficiency. You are cutting it close tonight, Miss Zimmerman, Mrs. Cooper said disapprovingly. I apologize. There was trouble on the road. Willa kept her explanation brief, not wanting to draw more attention than necessary. She ate quickly and excused herself to her small room on the second floor. It contained little more than a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk for her clothes, and a single window that looked out over the street. Willa poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed away the day's grime as best she could, then sank onto the bed with a groan. Her arm throbbed where Hale had grabbed her, and her hands were raw from the axe handle. But worse than the physical pain was the crushing worry about money. With 2 days' wages docked, she would be short on her rent. Mrs. Cooper had no patience for late payments, and Willa could not afford to lose her room. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out a solution. Maybe she could pick up some laundry work on Sundays, or see if any of the stores needed help in the evenings. But she was already exhausted from the lumber work, and she knew her body would eventually give out if she pushed much harder. As sleep finally claimed her, her last thoughts were of pale blue eyes and a steady voice promising that things could be made right. The next morning dawned hot and cloudless. Willa dressed quickly and headed to the lumber camp, skipping breakfast to save money. The work crew was already assembled when she arrived, and Hale gave her a pointed look but said nothing about the previous evening's encounter. The day passed much like any other, filled with backbreaking labor and little rest. Willa was careful to work harder than ever, not wanting to give Hale any excuse to dock her wages again. By mid-afternoon, her hands were bleeding through her gloves, but she kept swinging her axe with methodical determination. She was so focused on her work that she did not notice the arrival of 2 men on horseback until the foreman's whistle blew, calling everyone to stop. Willa looked up to see a well-dressed man in a suit standing next to Bennett Frost, who looked completely at ease despite being in the middle of the lumber camp. Everyone, this is Mr. Thomas Brennan, the owner of this company, Hale announced, his voice tight with forced politeness. He is here for an inspection. Brennan was a middle-aged man with graying hair and sharp eyes that took in every detail of the operation. He walked through the work area with Bennett following behind, asking questions of various workers. When they reached Willa, Brennan paused. You are the only woman working here, he observed. Yes, sir. I am Willa Zimmerman." She set down her axe, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and bleeding hands. "Miss Zimmerman is one of our workers," Hale interjected quickly, "though her output is not always satisfactory." "Is that so?" Brennan's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Frost here told me an interesting story about wage theft and intimidation. He seemed to think I would want to know if my foreman was running my company dishonestly." Willa's eyes widened, and she looked at Bennett in shock. He stood with his arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression giving nothing away, but she saw the hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "That is a lie," Hale sputtered, his face reddening. "This mountain man does not know anything about how we run things here. Miss Zimmerman is a complainer who does not like being held to the same standards as the other workers." "Then you will not mind if I review the wage records and production logs," Brennan said coolly. "I want to see exactly how much each worker has produced and how much they have been paid for the past 6 months." "Of course, sir, but no buts, Hale. Get me those records now." Brennan's tone left no room for argument. As Hale hurried off to his office shack, Brennan turned back to Willa. "Mr. Frost tells me you are a good worker who has been cheated. Is that true?" Willa hesitated, glancing between Bennett and Brennan. This could either solve all her problems or cost her the only job she had. But Bennett gave her an encouraging nod, and she found herself straightening her shoulders. "Yes, sir. Foreman Hale has been docking my wages for false reasons. Yesterday he took 2 days' pay, claiming my production was low, but I know I met my quota. He has done similar things for months now, and it is becoming impossible to make ends meet." Once she started talking, the words came easier. "I work as hard as any man here, and I deserve to be paid fairly for it." "I see." Brennan's expression was unreadable. "We will get to the bottom of this." The next hour was tense as Brennan reviewed the records in Hale's office while the workers stood around awkwardly, unsure if they should continue working or wait. Bennett stayed close to Willa, his presence somehow reassuring despite them being virtual strangers. "You went to Mr. Brennan for me," Willa said quietly. "Why would you do that?" "Because it was the right thing to do." Bennett's answer was simple and direct. "I spent the evening asking around about the lumber company and your foreman. Turns out you are not the only worker he has been cheating, just the one he treats worst. Figured the owner might want to know his operation was being run crooked. What if it does not work? What if Brennan sides with Hale? Then we will figure out something else." The certainty in Bennett's voice made her want to believe him. Finally, Brennan emerged from the office with Hale trailing behind, looking decidedly pale. The owner's face was set in hard lines as he addressed the assembled workers. "It has come to my attention that there have been serious irregularities in how this operation has been managed," Brennan announced. "Foreman Hale has been systematically stealing from multiple workers by falsifying production records and inventing disciplinary reasons to reduce wages. This is unacceptable and illegal." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hale opened his mouth to protest, but Brennan cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You are fired, effective immediately. Pack your things and get off my property. I will be notifying the sheriff about your theft, and if any of the affected workers want to press charges, I will support them fully." Brennan's voice carried across the clearing with authority. "Miss Zimmerman, according to these records, you are owed approximately $43 in wages that were improperly withheld. I will pay you that amount immediately, along with a formal apology for how you have been treated under my employ." Willa felt her knees go weak. $43 was more money than she had expected, enough to cover her rent for nearly 2 months. "Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank Mr. Frost. He is the one who brought this to my attention." Brennan pulled out his wallet and counted out the money, pressing it into Willa's trembling hands. "I will be interviewing for a new foreman and implementing better oversight to ensure this does not happen again. In the meantime, if anyone else has been cheated, come see me, and we will make it right." Hale stood frozen, his face a mask of impotent rage as he stared at Bennett. "You just made yourself an enemy mountain man." "Get off my property, Hale," Brennan ordered sharply. "Now." As the disgraced foreman gathered his belongings and left, the other workers erupted into conversation. Several came forward to report their own missing wages, and Brennan patiently reviewed each case. Willa clutched her recovered money, still trying to process what had just happened. Bennett touched her elbow gently. "Are you all right? I cannot believe you did that. Nobody has ever." She trailed off, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Thank you seems inadequate, but I do not know what else to say. You do not need to say anything." His rough hand squeezed her arm carefully, mindful of yesterday's bruising. "You earned that money with honest work. All I did was make sure you got it. Still, I owe you. If there is anything I can do, have dinner with me tonight." The request seemed to surprise Bennett as much as it did Willa, and she saw a faint flush color his weathered cheeks above his beard. "I mean, if you want to celebrate your victory. No obligation or anything." Willa felt a smile tug at her lips, the first genuine one in weeks. "I would like that very much." They agreed to meet at the restaurant near the hotel at 7 o'clock, and Willa floated through the rest of the workday in a daze. Several of her co-workers congratulated her and thanked her for standing up to Hale, saying it had given them the courage to report their own missing wages. By the time work ended, the atmosphere in the camp had completely changed, shifting from oppressed tension to cautious optimism. Willa hurried back to the boarding house and carefully tucked most of her recovered wages into her trunk, keeping out enough to pay her overdue rent and buy a proper dinner. Then she stripped down and washed thoroughly, scrubbing away every trace of sawdust and sweat. Her hands were too damaged to look presentable, but she wrapped them carefully and put on her only good dress, a simple blue cotton that had belonged to her mother. She studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, barely recognizing the nervous young woman staring back. Her auburn hair was still damp from washing, and she left it down around her shoulders instead of in her usual practical braid. It had been so long since she had cared about her appearance beyond being clean and functional for work. The restaurant was modest but respectable, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of roasting meat filling the air. Bennett was already waiting outside when she arrived, and she almost walked past him before she realized who he was. He had cleaned up as well, his hair still damp and brushed back from his face, his beard neatly trimmed. He wore a clean shirt that strained across his muscular shoulders and chest, and he held his hat nervously in his large hands. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her blush. "You clean up well yourself," she replied, taking his offered arm. They settled at a corner table, and Bennett ordered them both steak with potatoes and vegetables, along with coffee. For a few minutes, they ate in slightly awkward silence, neither quite sure how to begin the conversation. "How long have you been living in the mountains?" Willa finally asked, genuinely curious about this man who had turned her life around. "About 6 years now. I was working as a ranch hand in Colorado when I turned 18, but I never felt comfortable around too many people. The mountains called to me, I guess. So I learned to trap and hunt, and I have been on my own mostly ever since." Bennett took a sip of coffee. "I come down to towns like Deeming a few times a year to trade furs and restock supplies, but I prefer the wilderness." "That sounds lonely." "Sometimes, but it is peaceful too. No bosses stealing wages, no politics, no crowds, just me and the land." He paused, his blue eyes studying her. What about you? How did you end up working at a lumber camp? Willa told him about her father's death in the mine collapse, the debts she had inherited, and her struggle to find work that paid enough to survive. Bennett listened intently, his expression darkening when she described how few options were available to women alone. "That is not right," he said firmly. "You should not have to work yourself to death just to keep a roof over your head, and you definitely should not be cheated when you do work." "Well, thanks to you, things will be better now, at least for a while." Willa smiled at him over her coffee cup. "You have a strong sense of justice, Bennett Frost. My pa taught me that every person deserves fair treatment and honest pay for honest work. He was a railroad worker, died when a supervisor ignored safety concerns to save money. 10 men died because of that foreman's greed." The pain in Bennett's voice was old but still raw. "I swore then I would never let anyone get away with that kind of thing if I could stop it." "I am sorry about your father." Willa reached across the table instinctively, resting her bandaged hand on his. "But he raised a good man." Bennett's hand turned over to gently hold hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. The contact sent a flutter through Willa's chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with attraction. They sat like that for a moment, the busy restaurant fading into background noise. "When do you head back to the mountains?" she asked, not wanting to know the answer but needing to hear it. "I was planning to leave the day after tomorrow." Bennett's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "But I am finding reasons to consider staying a bit longer." They finished their meal slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. Bennett walked her back to the boarding house, and they stood outside on the porch, reluctant to say good night. "I would like to see you again tomorrow," Bennett said, his voice rough with an emotion Willa was afraid to name yet. "If that is all right with you." "I would like that too." Willa found herself moving closer, drawn by the warmth radiating from his large frame. "Maybe you could show me how you convinced Mr. Brennan to investigate Hale." "That is not a very romantic second date," Bennett said with a hint of humor in his voice. "Who said anything about romance?" But Willa was smiling as she said it, and Bennett grinned back. "My mistake." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her bandaged knuckles. "Sleep well, Willa Zimmerman." "You too, Bennett Frost." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his broad shoulders and confident stride making him easy to follow with her eyes until he turned the corner. Then she floated up to her room and lay awake for hours, her thoughts full of blue eyes and gentle strength. The next day at work felt entirely different. The acting foreman, a fair-minded man named John Collins who had been the lead worker, treated everyone with respect and made sure production quotas were reasonable. Willa's hands were too damaged to grip the axe properly, so Collins assigned her to sorting and stacking, which was easier on her injuries. During the lunch break, Bennett arrived at the camp with a small jar of salve. "This is made from pine resin and herbs," he explained, carefully taking her hand and unwrapping the bandages. "It will help your hands heal faster." The salve felt cool and soothing against her raw skin, and Bennett's touch was surprisingly gentle for such a large, rough man. Several of the other workers watched with interest, and Willa felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment at the public attention. "There," Bennett said, rewrapping her hands with clean bandages he had brought. "Try to keep them dry if you can." "Thank you." Willa flexed her fingers experimentally. "That does feel better." "Good." He stood, towering over her even more than usual since she was sitting. "I was thinking we could have a picnic dinner tonight instead of the restaurant. There is a nice spot by the river if you are interested." "That sounds lovely. What time?" "I will come get you at 6, if that works." Willa agreed, and Bennett left after extracting a promise that she would be careful not to strain her hands. The rest of the afternoon dragged by, Willa constantly watching the sun's progress across the sky and wishing it would move faster. Finally, the workday ended and she rushed back to the boarding house to clean up and change. She wore the same blue dress, having no other option, but she added a shawl her mother had embroidered years ago. Bennett arrived promptly at 6, carrying a basket and a blanket. They walked together to the edge of town where the river cut through the landscape, creating a ribbon of green in the otherwise dry terrain. Bennett led her to a spot under a cottonwood tree where the grass grew thick and soft. He spread the blanket and unpacked the basket, revealing bread, cheese, cold chicken, apples, and a bottle of lemonade. "Did you make all this?" Willa asked, impressed. "The restaurant packed most of it, but I picked the apples from a tree on the way here." Bennett looked almost shy. "I am not much of a cook beyond game and campfire meals." They settled on the blanket and ate while the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The river burbled nearby, and birds sang their evening songs from the trees. It was peaceful in a way Willa had not experienced in years. "Tell me about the mountains," she said, lying back on the blanket and looking up at the first stars appearing overhead. "What is it really like up there?" Bennett lay beside her, close enough that his arm brushed hers. "It is hard to put into words. The silence is different from silence down here, deeper somehow. The air smells like pine and snow, even in summer at the higher elevations. You can see for miles from the peaks, and at night the stars are so bright they almost hurt to look at. It sounds beautiful." "It is, but it is also dangerous and unforgiving. One mistake can cost you your life. The weather can change in minutes, animals are unpredictable, and help is days away if you get injured." His voice grew more serious. "It is not a place for everyone, but it is your place." Willa turned her head to look at him. In the fading light, his profile was strong and handsome, his longer hair ruffled by the evening breeze. It was. "Now I am not so sure." Bennett turned to meet her gaze, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Meeting you has made me question things I thought I had figured out." "We only met 2 days ago," Willa whispered, but she did not look away. "Some things you just know." Bennett reached up to brush a strand of auburn hair from her face, his touch achingly gentle. "From the moment I saw you standing up to those men, refusing to back down despite being afraid, I knew you were special. I was not being brave. I was being stubborn and desperate. Sometimes those are the same thing." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Can I kiss you, Willa?" Instead of answering, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss started soft and tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Bennett's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made Willa's heart race and her skin flush with heat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Willa rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart through his shirt. "I was not expecting this when I came to town," Bennett said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was not expecting you. I was not expecting to be rescued by a mountain man who fights for justice." Willa looked up at him with a smile. "But I am glad you came along when you did." They stayed by the river until full dark, talking and stealing kisses, reluctant to return to reality. But eventually, the night air grew cool and Bennett walked Willa back to the boarding house, holding her hand the entire way. "I should probably be heading back to the mountains soon," Bennett said when they reached her doorstep. "But I find myself not wanting to leave." "Then do not." The words came out before Willa could think them through. "Stay a while longer, please. I do not have much reason to stay in town. My supplies are stocked and my furs are sold." But Bennett was looking at her in a way that suggested he wanted her to give him a reason. "Stay for me." Willa stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. I know we barely know each other, but I want the chance to know you better. These past 2 days have been the happiest I have been in years, and I do not want that to end yet. Bennett covered her hand with his expression torn between longing and uncertainty. I am not a town person, Willa. I do not know how to be around people all the time, how to live in houses with walls and neighbors. The mountains are where I belong. I am not asking you to give up the mountains forever. Just stay a little longer. Give us a chance to see if this could be something real. Her voice trembled with vulnerability. Unless you do not feel the same way I do. No, I feel it too. That is what scares me. Bennett pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I have been alone for so long, I am not sure I know how to be with someone. We can figure it out together. Willa buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and leather that clung to him. Please, Bennett. Just a few more days. All right, he agreed softly. A few more days. Those few days stretched into a week, then 2. Bennett found odd jobs around town, helping with construction and heavy labor that paid well enough to cover his hotel room. Every evening he would meet Willa after her work at the lumber camp, and they would walk together, talk, and discover more about each other. Willa learned that Bennett had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise, making her laugh at unexpected moments. He was well-read despite his solitary lifestyle, having traded furs for books over the years. He was also surprisingly thoughtful, bringing her little gifts like wildflowers or smooth river stones that he said reminded him of her eyes. Bennett learned that Willa was stronger than she looked, both physically and emotionally. She had a quick mind and a talent for numbers that had been wasted in her current work. She loved to read too, whenever she could afford books or borrow them, and she had dreams of maybe running her own business someday, though she laughed when she said it, as if the idea was impossible. Why is that funny? Bennett asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house. You would be good at running a business. Women do not run businesses, Bennett, at least not the kind I am thinking of. Willa shook her head. I would want to do something with numbers, maybe bookkeeping or accounting, but no one would hire a woman for that. Then you start your own service. There are plenty of small business owners in these territories who need help with their books, but cannot afford a full-time accountant. Bennett spoke with such conviction that Willa almost believed it could happen. You are smart and hardworking. You could make it succeed. That would take money I do not have, but you could save up for it, especially now that you are getting paid fairly. He took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. I believe in you, Willa. You can do more than split logs for the rest of your life. His faith in her was both inspiring and terrifying. Willa had spent so long just trying to survive that she had stopped dreaming about anything better. But Bennett made her want to dream again. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened. The kisses grew longer and more passionate, though Bennett was always respectful of propriety, never pushing for more than Willa was ready to give. But the desire between them was undeniable, a constant simmer that threatened to boil over every time they were alone together. Willa knew she was falling in love with him. It terrified her because she knew Bennett's heart belonged to the mountains, and eventually he would have to choose between that life and staying with her. She tried not to think about it, to just enjoy each day as it came, but the question hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. One evening, nearly a month after they had met, Bennett seemed particularly quiet as they walked along the river. The September air was starting to cool, hinting at the autumn to come. Willa had been talking about her day at work, but she trailed off when she noticed his distraction. What is wrong? She asked, stopping to face him. Bennett ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she had learned to recognize. I need to head back to the mountains soon. The weather will be turning before long, and I need to get my winter camp set up before the snow starts." Willa's heart sank, though she had known this moment was coming. "When?" "A few days, maybe a week at most." He reached for her hands, holding them carefully. "Come with me." "What?" She stared at him in shock. "Come with me to the mountains. I have been thinking about it for weeks, trying to figure out how to make this work. I do not want to leave you, Willa. I love you." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know it is fast, and I know the mountains are not easy, but I could teach you everything you need to know. We could build a life together up there." "Bennett, Willa's mind reeled. "I have never even seen the mountains up close. I do not know anything about that kind of life. I would take care of you. I would teach you. You are strong and smart. You would adapt." His hands tightened on hers. "I am not saying it would be perfect, but we would be together. That is what matters." Willa pulled away, walking a few steps toward the river. Her thoughts were chaos, torn between the love she felt for Bennett and the reality of what he was asking. "You want me to give up everything I know, move to a place I have never been, and live a life I know nothing about?" "That is a lot to ask, I know. But what is the alternative? I cannot stay in town permanently, Willa. I would go crazy living like this all the time, walls closing in, people everywhere." His voice was pained. "And asking you to wait for me while I spend most of the year in the mountains is not fair to you either. So I have to be the one to give up my life." Anger flashed through her, hot and unexpected. "You get to keep doing what you want, and I just have to follow along and hope I can survive it." "That is not what I meant." Bennett looked stricken. "I am trying to find a way for us to be together." "No, you are trying to make me fit into your life without changing anything about what you want." Willa's voice shook. "Did you ever consider staying here? Really staying, not just for a few weeks, but making a life in town?" "I told you I cannot do that." "Cannot or will not." She turned to face him, tears burning in her eyes. "I love you too, Bennett. But love is not enough if one person has to sacrifice everything while the other sacrifices nothing. Willa, please, I need to think." She gathered her skirts and started walking back toward town. "I am sorry, I just need some time alone." Bennett called after her, but she did not stop. By the time she reached the boarding house, tears were streaming down her face. She made it to her room and collapsed on the bed, sobbing into her pillow. She loved him. That was the terrible, wonderful truth of it. She loved Bennett Frost with an intensity that frightened her. But he was asking her to give up everything familiar and safe to follow him into a wilderness she did not know if she could survive. It was romantic in theory, but the reality was stark and unforgiving. Willa cried herself to sleep and woke the next morning with swollen eyes and a heavy heart. She went to work at the lumber camp mechanically, her body going through the motions while her mind spun in circles. Bennett did not come by that day or the next. By the third day, Willa was starting to panic, wondering if he had already left for the mountains without saying goodbye. But when she returned to the boarding house that evening, Mrs. Cooper told her a gentleman was waiting for her in the parlor. Bennett stood when she entered, his hat in his hands, his expression uncertain. They stared at each other for a long moment before he spoke. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "You were right. I was only thinking about what I wanted, not what would be fair to you." Willa's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "I am sorry, too. I should not have reacted so harshly." "No, you should have. You were right to be angry." Bennett took a step closer. "I have been doing a lot of thinking the past few days, about what matters most to me, about what kind of life I want to build. And," Willa hardly dared to breathe, "and I realized that the mountains were my refuge because I was running from something. From people, from the pain of losing my pa, from the fear of being hurt again." He set his hat on a side table and moved closer. "But you make me want to stop running. You make me want to build something real, even if it is hard, even if it scares me." "What are you saying?" "I am saying I want to stay. Not just for a few weeks, but really stay. Make a life here in Deeming with you." Bennett reached out and took her hands. "I still love the mountains, and maybe we can go up there sometimes during the good weather, but my home is wherever you are, Willa." "I know that now. What about the walls closing in, the people everywhere?" She searched his face, looking for doubt but finding only certainty. "I will figure it out. It will be hard sometimes, but you are worth it. We are worth it." He raised her hands to his lips. "I love you and I want to spend my life with you, whatever that looks like." Willa felt fresh tears spill over, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. "I love you too, so much it terrifies me." Bennett pulled her into his arms and she clung to him, feeling the solid warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. "Will you marry me?" he asked against her hair. "I know I do not have much to offer right now, but I am a hard worker and I will do whatever it takes to build a good life for us." "Yes," Willa said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Willa felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "We should probably tell Mrs. Cooper before she throws us out for improper behavior in her parlor," Willa said with a breathless laugh. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Bennett sold his trapping equipment and most of his mountain gear, keeping only his hunting rifle and a few sentimental items. He took a permanent job with the lumber company, where his strength and experience in the wilderness made him invaluable for the hardest work. Thomas Brennan, impressed by Bennett's integrity in handling the wage theft situation, offered him a supervisory position with better pay. Bennett accepted, surprising himself by discovering he had a talent for leadership and organization. He was firm but fair with the workers, and production actually increased under his guidance. Willa continued her work at the lumber camp until a week before the wedding, when she finally accepted that she needed to rest and heal properly. Her hands had improved significantly thanks to Bennett's salve and lighter work assignments, but they would always bear scars from those early months of desperate labor. They were married in the small church in Deeming on a crisp October morning, with Mrs. Cooper and several co-workers as witnesses. Willa wore a new dress that Bennett had insisted on buying her, pale yellow cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Bennett wore a proper suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome, his longer hair neatly brushed and his beard trimmed close. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Bennett kissed her with such tenderness that Willa felt her heart might burst with happiness. They had a small celebration dinner at the restaurant where they had their first date, then walked hand in hand to the small house they had rented on the edge of town. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was theirs. Bennett carried Willa over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture, and then they were alone for the first time as husband and wife. That night, with gentle hands and whispered words, they made love for the first time. Bennett was careful and patient, making sure Willa felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin to skin, hearts beating in sync. "I never thought I could be this happy," Willa said softly, tracing patterns on Bennett's chest with her fingers. "Me either." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I spent so long thinking I needed to be alone to be at peace. Turns out I just needed the right person to share my life with." "Do you miss it, the mountains?" she had to ask, even though she feared the answer. "Sometimes," Bennett admitted. "But it is not the aching need it used to be. I still love the wilderness, but I love you more. And who knows, maybe someday we can spend summers up there when we have built enough security down here." I would like that. I want to see the places you love, understand that part of you. Willa tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. Thank you for staying, for choosing us. Thank you for being worth staying for. Bennett's arms tightened around her. I love you, Willa Frost. I love you too, Bennett Frost. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and the certainty that they had found something rare and precious. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Bennett struggled sometimes with the confines of town life, growing restless and short-tempered when he went too long without open spaces. They developed a routine where he would go hunting in the mountains for a few days every couple of months, coming back refreshed and more himself. Willa missed him terribly during those trips, but she understood his need for them. And he always came back to her, often with fresh game and stories of what he had seen. Slowly, he began teaching her wilderness skills, taking her on short camping trips where she learned to track animals, identify plants, and navigate by the stars. She discovered she had an aptitude for wilderness survival that surprised them both. There was something deeply satisfying about learning to live off the land, even if she preferred the comfort of their home most of the time. Meanwhile, Willa had been quietly saving money and researching how to start her bookkeeping business. Bennett encouraged her at every turn, helping her spread word among the business owners in town that she was available for accounting work. Slowly, she built up a client base, starting with small jobs but gradually taking on bigger accounts. By their second anniversary, Willa had enough regular clients that she could work from home, managing the books for several businesses in town. She had a natural talent for numbers and organization, and her clients appreciated her attention to detail and fair prices. Bennett continued to thrive as a supervisor at the lumber company, earning Brennan's trust through consistent hard work and honest management. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Then, in the spring of their third year together, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Bennett over dinner, nervously watching his face for his reaction. "A baby," he repeated, setting down his fork with a slightly dazed expression. "We are having a baby. Yes. Are you happy?" Willa asked anxiously. Bennett stood up so quickly he nearly knocked his chair over, then pulled Willa into his arms. "Happy? I am terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once. We are having a baby." He kissed her soundly, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your pa," Willa laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "The baby cannot hear you yet. Does not matter. I want to start talking to our child as soon as possible." Bennett looked up at her with such love and joy that Willa felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you for this gift. It takes two to make a baby, Bennett Frost." "I know, but still, thank you." He stood and cupped her face in his large hands. "I promise I will be the best father I can be. I will protect you both with everything I have." "I know you will." The pregnancy was not easy. Willa suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Bennett fussed over her like a mother hen, bringing her ginger tea and saltines, rubbing her feet when they swelled, and reading to her when she was too tired to do anything but lie in bed. As her belly grew, Bennett became even more protective, insisting she stop doing anything strenuous. He took over most of the household chores and cooking, coming home from the lumber camp to clean and prepare meals. Willa's clients were understanding about her occasional need to reschedule meetings, and she continued working from home as much as possible. In late November, on a cold night with snow beginning to fall outside, Willa went into labor. The midwife, Mrs. Chen, had been prepared for weeks, and she arrived quickly when Bennett ran to fetch her. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Bennett stayed by Willa's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow and whispering encouragement even as he quietly panicked inside. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, a baby's cry filled the little house. Mrs. Chen wrapped the newborn in a blanket and placed him in Willa's exhausted arms. "A boy," the midwife announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Willa gazed down at her son's red, wrinkled face, overcome with a love so powerful it made everything she had felt before seem like a pale shadow. Bennett knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with wonder. "He is perfect," Bennett whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's much larger finger. "Look at that grip. He is going to be strong. What should we name him?" Willa asked, unable to look away from her son. They had discussed names for months but never quite agreed on one. Now, looking at their child, Bennett said, "What about James, after your father?" Willa's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You would do that, of course. Your pa would want to be remembered, and maybe our son can carry on his name with better luck." Bennett leaned over to kiss Willa's forehead. "James Frost, what do you think? I think it is perfect." Willa looked down at baby James, who had stopped crying and was now staring up at his parents with unfocused blue eyes. "Welcome to the world, James Frost. We love you so much already." Those early months with a newborn were exhausting but magical. Bennett proved to be a devoted father, waking in the night to change diapers and walking James around the house when he cried, singing softly in his deep voice until the baby settled. Willa nursed their son and marveled at how something so small could contain so much life and possibility. As James grew, his personality emerged. He was curious and active, always reaching for things and making little noises as if trying to communicate. He had Willa's auburn hair and Bennett's blue eyes, a perfect blend of both parents. "He is going to be a handful," Bennett predicted one evening as he watched 6-month-old James determinedly pull himself across the floor toward the fireplace. He scooped up his son before the baby could get too close to the heat. "Look at this determination. He knows what he wants." "He gets that from you," Willa said with amusement, taking James and settling him in her lap with a wooden rattle to distract him. "Maybe, but his stubbornness is all you, my love." Bennett grinned at her indignant expression. Life settled into a new rhythm. Willa's bookkeeping business continued to grow, and she hired a local teenager to help with childcare a few hours each day so she could focus on work. Bennett's position at the lumber company became even more secure when Brennan promoted him to general manager, overseeing all operations. They bought a bigger house when James turned 2, one with a real yard and enough room for the family to grow. Willa planted a garden, and Bennett built a workshop where he could do woodworking in his spare time, a skill he had picked up out of necessity but found he enjoyed. On James's 3rd birthday, as they celebrated with cake and a few neighbor children, Willa told Bennett they were expecting another child. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, before carefully setting her down and apologizing for being too rough. "You did not hurt me," Willa assured him, smiling at his concern. "I am not made of glass, I know, but still, I want to take care of you." Bennett placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Both of you." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Willa knew what to expect and could pace herself better. Bennett was no less attentive, but he trusted her judgment more, backing off when she insisted she was fine to work or do light chores. Their daughter was born on a warm June evening in 1889, with much less drama than James's birth. She arrived quickly, barely giving Mrs. Chen time to prepare, and announced her presence with a piercing wail that made Bennett laugh with relief. "A daughter," he said, cradling the tiny girl against his broad chest with surprising gentleness. "We have a daughter, Willa. They named her Sarah after Bennett's mother, who had died when he was young. She had darker hair than James, almost black, but the same blue Frost eyes." Where James had been an active, determined baby, Sarah was calmer, more observant, seeming to study the world around her with serious contemplation. "She has your eyes and my practical nature," Willa said one afternoon when Sarah was 3 months old. The baby lay on a blanket, watching her older brother play with wooden blocks with intense focus. "Heaven help us when she grows up," Bennett replied with a grin. "A woman with your brains and determination is going to change the world, or at least make her corner of it better." Willa leaned against her husband, watching their children with contentment. "We have built a good life, haven't we? The best life I could have imagined." Bennett wrapped his arm around her waist. "Sometimes I still cannot believe we found each other. If I had ridden past that lumber camp even 5 minutes later that day, I might have missed seeing Hale threatening you. We might never have met. But you did not ride past. You stopped, and you helped me, and you changed everything." Willa turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me my wages back, but more than that, you gave me hope. You showed me I deserved better than I was settling for. You always deserved better. You just needed someone to stand beside you while you fought for it." Bennett kissed her softly. "You did the hard work yourself, Willa. Building your business, raising our children, making this house a home. I just got to be part of it." "We are a team," Willa said firmly. "Always have been, always will be." As the years passed, their family continued to grow. 2 more children came along. Another boy they named Thomas after Bennett's father, and finally a second daughter, Elizabeth. Their house was filled with noise and laughter, the chaos of children and the warmth of a family deeply rooted in love. Bennett never completely lost his connection to the wilderness. Every few months, he would take trips into the mountains, sometimes alone, sometimes with James as the boy grew older and learned his father's skills. But he always came home, because home was where his heart truly belonged now. Willa's bookkeeping business became one of the most successful in the territory. By the time she turned 40, she employed 3 people and managed the accounts for more than 30 businesses. She had proven that a woman could succeed in a field dominated by men, and she took pride in mentoring other young women who wanted to pursue similar paths. The lumber company continued to thrive under Bennett's management. He treated his workers fairly, making sure wages were always paid promptly and in full, never forgetting the lesson of his own father's death or the injustice that had brought him and Willa together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Willa back to the spot by the river where they had their first picnic. The cottonwood tree was still there, older and more gnarled, but still providing shade and shelter. "You remember what I told you here?" Bennett asked as they sat on a blanket, watching the water flow past. Their children were with Mrs. Cooper for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. "You told me the mountains were beautiful and dangerous and not for everyone," Willa recalled. "You also told me you were not sure where you belonged anymore. I know now. I belong wherever you are." Bennett took her hand, running his thumb over the wedding ring he had placed there 2 decades earlier. "You are my home, Willa, you and our children. The mountains are beautiful, but they are not what makes my life meaningful. You are. We did it, did not we?" Willa said softly. "Built something real and lasting from nothing but determination and love. We did. And I would not change a single moment, even the hard parts." Bennett pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had first drawn her to him. "You ever regret it, giving up your mountain life?" She had to ask, even after all these years. "No, I traded solitude for love, and that is the best deal I ever made." Bennett kissed the top of her head. The mountains were my refuge when I was running from pain, but you gave me something worth running toward instead." They sat like that until the sun began to set, comfortable in the silence of two people who had built a life together through trials and triumphs. The river sang its eternal song, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called to its mate. When they finally returned home, their children rushed to greet them, all talking at once about what they had done that day. Bennett scooped up little Elizabeth while James and Thomas competed for their mother's attention. And Sarah, now a thoughtful 10-year-old, smiled at the chaos with the same practical acceptance she had shown since infancy. That night, after the children were all asleep, Willa and Bennett sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the New Mexico sky. "I have been thinking," Bennett said slowly. "Maybe next summer we could take a family trip up to the mountains. Nothing too difficult, just a week or two camping. Show the children the place where their father used to live. They would love that." Willa squeezed his hand. "And I would too. I want to see that part of your life, understand it fully. It will be different with all of us together. Noisier, definitely, but I think it could be good. Teach them skills they will need. Show them there is more to the world than this town." Bennett's voice carried excitement. "We could make it a tradition, every summer. I like that idea. Our children should know both worlds, the wild and the civilized. Just like their father learned to live in both." Willa leaned against him. "You have become quite the town dweller, Bennett Frost. Who would have thought? Not me, that is certain, but you made it possible. You made everything possible." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I love you, Willa. After 20 years, I love you more than I did on our wedding day. I love you too. Thank you for standing up for me that day at the lumber camp. Thank you for seeing something in me worth fighting for. Thank you for seeing something in me worth keeping around." Bennett's voice was rough with emotion. "We saved each other, I think." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built a life that exceeded anything they could have imagined. The foreman who had tried to cheat Willa was long gone, his name barely remembered in Deeming. But the mountain man who had made sure she got every penny owed had stayed, had chosen love over solitude, and had built a legacy that would outlast them both. Their children would grow up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their father had stood up for justice, and their mother had fought for her dignity. They would learn that love was not just about feelings, but about choosing each other every day, about sacrifice and compromise and building something together. As the years continued to roll forward, Bennett and Willa grew old together, their love deepening with time like roots growing strong beneath the surface. Their children grew up and started their own families, some staying in Deeming, others venturing out to seek their fortunes elsewhere. James took over management of the lumber company when Bennett retired, running it with the same integrity his father had shown. Sarah became a teacher, then eventually opened a school for girls, determined to give young women the education and opportunities she had been fortunate enough to receive. Thomas followed his father's wanderlust, becoming a guide who led people safely through the mountains, bridging the wild and civilized worlds just as Bennett had. And Elizabeth surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, fighting in courtrooms for the kind of justice her father had sought with more direct methods. Through it all, Bennett and Willa remained the center of their growing family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching grandchildren play in the yard, and remembered the day that had changed everything. "You think things would have worked out if you had not stopped that day?" Willa asked once when they were both in their 60s, their hair gray and their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. "I have to believe they would have. Maybe not the same way, but somehow, because some things are just meant to be." Bennett took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life. I knew it from the moment I saw you." "You could not have known that," Willa protested with a smile. "Could not I? I looked at you standing there, refusing to back down even though you were afraid, and something in my chest just knew. This woman is special. This woman is mine." Bennett raised her hand to his lips. "I have never doubted it since, even when I made you choose between me and the mountains. Especially then, because you were right to make me choose. Love means nothing if you are not willing to sacrifice for it." His blue eyes, still clear and bright despite his age, held hers. "And I never regretted my choice. Not once. I never thanked you properly, you know, for giving up your old life for me." Willa's voice was soft with emotion. "You thank me every day by building this life with me, by loving me, by giving me our children, by being my partner in everything." Bennett pulled her close. "I got the better end of the deal, Willa Frost. I always did." As the sun set over Deeming, painting the sky in brilliant colors one more time, Bennett and Willa sat together in the peace of a love that had endured through decades. They had started with nothing but determination and hope, built a life through hard work and mutual support, and created a legacy that would outlive them both. The mountain man had made sure she got every penny owed that day so long ago. But more than that, he had given her his heart, his life, and his unwavering devotion. And she had given him the same in return, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures are not found in wild places, but in the courage to stay and build something lasting with another person. Their story became legend in Deeming, passed down through generations as an example of love conquering hardship, of justice prevailing over greed, and of two people finding each other exactly when they needed to most. The lumber camp where they met was long gone, replaced by new buildings and new businesses. But the river still flowed, the mountains still stood tall against the sky, and the love story of Bennett Frost and Willa Zimmerman continued to inspire those who heard it. In their final years together, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved them deeply, Bennett and Willa would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains one more time. Their hands would be clasped together, weathered and worn but still strong, their hearts beating in the same rhythm they had found decades ago by a river in the fading light. They had built more than a family or a business or a legacy. They had built a love that would endure through time, a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, of choosing courage over comfort, and of believing that two people who were meant to find each other would always somehow manage to do so. The foreman had tried to cheat Willa out of her wages, but the mountain man had made sure she got every penny owed. And in the process, they had both received something far more valuable than money could ever buy. A love that would last a lifetime and beyond, a partnership that weathered every storm, and a happiness built on the foundation of mutual respect, deep devotion, and the simple courage to choose each other every single day. As the stars came out over Deeming one final time, Bennett whispered to Willa, "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." And Willa whispered back, "Thank you for being worth staying for." Their love story had begun with an act of justice and grown into something beautiful and enduring, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from standing up for what is right, even when it would be easier to walk away. They had saved each other in every way that mattered, and together they had built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams.